Welcome and good evening. My name is Lynne Kochmanski, President of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County. And I'm joined this evening by Sandy Sorini Elser, our Advocacy Director, Kris Buffington, our Board Secretary and Voting Rights Co-Chair, along with Sue Smereck, also our Voting Rights Co-Chair. Our presentation this evening, Advocating for Ballot Proposals, is about the 3 statewide ballot proposals that will be on the ballot in November, and why the League of Women Voters of Michigan supports them. The League is a nonpartisan voter education organization encouraging informed, active participation in government. We believe that voting is a fundamental citizen right that must be guaranteed. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take positions on issues we have studied and advocate for those issues. And now I'll turn the meeting over to Sue Smereck, who will speak about Proposal 1. Sue?
Thank you. Proposal 1 is a constitutional amendment that would change the Michigan Constitution in terms of term limits and transparency. This proposal was placed on the ballot by a 2/3 vote of the Michigan legislature. That makes this proposal different from the others. There were no signatures from voters required for this proposal. And the other 2, Propositions 2 and 3, you will hear about, were initiated by voter signed petitions. All 3 of these proposals will require a majority vote in the November 8th election to pass. This proposed amendment for transparency would require members of the legislature, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and attorney general to file annual financial disclosure reports after 2023. These reports would include assets, liabilities, income sources, future employment agreements, gifts, travel reimbursements, and positions held in organizations except religious, social, and political organizations. The gifts would include disclosing gifts from lobbyists. This proposed amendment for transparency would require the legislature to implement its features, but would not allow them to limit or restrict reporting requirements. All these reports would then be filed to the Secretary of State. Are there exceptions? Yes. The officials do not have to include positions in religious, social, and political organizations. Why is Proposal 1 important? To date, it's amazing to think the Michigan legislature has not passed any laws requiring transparency by legislators or executive officials. Unfortunately, Michigan ranks 50th in the nation in transparency. That's a statistic we are hoping to improve upon. Currently, only Michigan and Idaho have no reporting requirements. And this proposal would also maintain the lifetime limit of service in the legislature to 12 years. As Lynn talked about, the League of Women Voters supports issues we have studied, and the League of Women Voters of Michigan supports this amendment based on the National League position on citizens' rights and responsible government. So what will this proposition do for term limits? It will allow legislators to serve 12 years in any combination in the House of Representatives, 12 years in any combinations in the House of Representatives and or the Senate. Currently, the term limits are 14 years. Legislators may serve 6 years in the Michigan House, 8 years in the Senate. This proposal would allow legislators to serve longer in one chamber or any combination thereof. Are there exceptions to this rule? Yes, a person elected in November in 2022 may be elected to the number of times allowed when that person became a candidate. The 12 years remains a lifetime limit. Since 1992, there have been 15 states that have enacted term limits. Michigan is one of only 5 states with lifetime limits. Others have limits on the number of years you can serve consecutively. In order to change federal law, it would require a United States constitutional amendment for federal term limits for those seeking federal office. Why do these term limits matter? The current pattern of terms in the House and Senate encourage legislators to begin looking for their next position as soon as they are elected. If this proposal is enacted, legislators can focus more on the business of legislative work. The goal is to reduce the revolving door in the legislature. This proposal continues the lifetime term limits that we've had for 30 years. While not everyone supports the exact structure of these term limits, the League of Women Voters and other organizations support the overall goal of this proposition to increase transparency as well as adjust term limits. This slide shows a selection of those who support this proposition. We have the League of Women Voters at the top. I call your attention to the fact that there are people across the spectrum who are supporting this proposition. To find more information, you can go to the League of Women Voters website and the Voters for Transparency and Term Limits. And this gives you an idea of all of the features of Proposition 1. And now we'll go to Kris Buffington, who will talk to us about Proposition 2.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Appreciate that. Also want to remind people, if you have questions about Proposal 1 or any of the ballot proposals, feel free to put them in chat. And we, the speakers, when we're not speaking, will be looking to answer them in chat. We'll also have some time after the PowerPoint for people to ask questions then. So I'll be speaking about Promote the Vote, Proposal 2. And this is a constitutional amendment that was brought to the ballot by a voter-driven petition. Nearly 670,000 signatures were collected, with over 500,000 of them verified by the Michigan Board of Elections. This, along with Proposal 3, are one of the most voter-supported petitions ever in the history of Michigan, stating there's a lot of support for this with good reason. Now, when we were passing out petitions, and a lot of times when the discussions for the 2022 proposals came up, I remember getting a lot of questions like, well, didn't the 2018 Promote the Vote petition take care of all of this? And I think one good way to understand is 2022 Promote the Vote is it builds on the strengths of the changes that we made, you know, through the 2018 proposal, and makes it stronger and expands the access and protections that voters can have. But just to review the Promote the Vote in 2018, over 66%, almost 67% of voters approved of this ballot, showing that Michiganders do support voting rights and voting access. What the 2018 ballot proposal did is it had voter registration expanded it to during the last 14 days of the election at clerks' offices, and even includes ways that one can do same-day voter registration. It allows no excuse applications for absentee ballots for up to 40 days before the election, which definitely expanded people's access to the election and really increase the number of voters that participated in our democratic elections last term. It opened absentee voting registration up to 15 days before the election. It provides for the auditing of elections based on our Constitution. Before then, it was purely statutory, meaning that as the whims and politics of our legislature would change, so could this. So a constitutional amendment really gives its roots in staying power. It protects the privacy of the ballot, and it requires military and overseas voters receive absentee ballots at least 45 days before the election, giving them a chance to get it in on time. It allowed and put a constitutional basis for protecting straight party voting option. And it allowed automatic voter registration when interacting with the Secretary of State offices. So it built a beautiful foundation for what we're trying to accomplish in 2022. So the 2022 Promote the Vote, ballot proposal number 2, requires 9 days of early voting. And think about what that does for people. Not everybody has a job that gives them extra time off to vote. Not everybody has childcare that allows that, or rides or transportation. So this really expands and allows more people to participate in voting in our democracy. It also recognizes the fundamental right to vote without harassment. And I think that's so important these days as there are some angry and violent things that happen on January 6th, and to have a constitutional amendment that protects even individual voters and our democracy is important. It requires that mail-in ballots from overseas voters and members of the military have their ballots counted if they are postmarked by election day. And I think about how important it is that even when our citizens are abroad, or when we have our brave members of the military serving overseas, how important it is to make sure that their votes count. And that's something that this proposal accomplishes. Promote the Vote also has as a requirement that publicly subsidize absentee ballots and a tracking system for ballot location. So it provides resources for that. It continues to allow voters to verify their identity by using a state ID or to sign an affidavit attesting to their identity. That is the way the rules are right now, and this puts it into the Constitution so that can't be played around with. This is very important to know the facts of this proposal and the other 2 proposals we're speaking about today. There's information being spread that provides inaccurate information about what's in here. And one of the inaccurate statements that is being made is that this proposal would prevent the use of IDs. And as you can see, it puts it right in the Constitution that we can use IDs, or that you have to do a legal affidavit to attest to your identity. It allows public sources and charities to fund local elections and funding sources, and that those funding sources must be disclosed. I don't know if a lot of people are aware that the way that churches and other organizations donate space, the way that other civic nonpartisan organizations can do voter registration, those are such important contributions to really making voting accessible and really allowing people to participate in democracy. So allowing these public sources and charities to fund local elections really makes it accessible and gives a lot of important tools for our elections. Other parts of the ballot proposal, the constitutional amendment, includes providing voters the right to a single application for absentee ballots for all future elections. So they wouldn't have to, if they forgot one year, oh my gosh, I forgot to request it, that application will be sent to them so that they can have the option of continuing to vote absentee if they prefer. It requires a ballot drop box for every 15,000 voters in a municipality. Again, that helps people that may have mobility issues, may have handicaps, may again have job schedules that wouldn't allow them to go into normal business hours. It keeps our democracy and elections accessible to our eligible voters of all, of rural, of urban, of all means and all schedules. This establishes that post-election audits can only be conducted by state and local officials. And this is so important to having our votes count accurately, so that there's no political parties or whims that can interfere with the true honest democracy in voting. It requires board canvassers to certify election results only on the official records of the votes cast. Again, a strong constitutional protection that everybody's votes, no matter who you are and who you're voting for, what you're saying yes or no to, actually really count. So why is passing this proposal to promote the vote so important? Again, it strengthens our democracy by making voting accessible to all eligible voters by providing early voting, mail-in voting, and secure drop boxes. Again, it makes sure every eligible voter's votes count, that nobody gets left out, and that we make sure they count by having the legally mandated clerks and public officials be the ones who do it. By being a constitutional amendment, again, it can only be changed, these conditions can only be changed by a majority of the voters, not by politicians, not by a single person. So some of the organizations that support the Promote the Vote 2022 Proposal 2, the ACLU, American Federation of Teachers, Common Cause, Equality Michigan, Gray Panthers, League of Women Voters of Michigan, Michigan AFL-CIO, NAACP, and Voters Not Politicians, and more. So why does the League of Women Voters of Michigan support 2022 Ballot Proposal 2, Promote the Vote? Because we believe voting is a fundamental citizen right that must be guaranteed. And it's at the cornerstone of our democracy. That's been at the roots of our mission for all through our history. And the League supports processes that increase ease and accessibility. For more information, you can go to these links, and we've been putting many of these links in chat for you to access those. And now I believe to the next slide and to one of my co-presenters, Sandy Sorini Elser.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Kris and Sue and Lynn, for your introduction and your great presentations on Proposal 1 and Proposal 2. I'm going to talk about Proposal 3, and this is a constitutional amendment, as Sue mentioned, that it was added to the November ballot because of voters signed petitions, and it will ensure that abortion remains safe and legal in Michigan now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. So Proposal 3 will affirm that every person has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the right to make and carry out decisions without political interference about all matters relating to pregnancy, including birth control, abortion, prenatal care, and childbirth. Proposal 3 will also ensure that everyone in Michigan has the right to safe and respectful care during birthing, the right to use temporary or permanent birth control, the right to continue or end a pregnancy pre-viability, and no one can be punished for having a miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. So let's spend a minute looking at that language that's going to be on the ballot for Proposal 3. It's only 100 words, and this slide has the first sentence of the ballot language, and you can follow along on the handout that we sent to you. And if you happen to have registered earlier after 7:30 this morning, we have your emails and we'll be able to send you the handouts. So the handout I'm speaking of is titled Handout 1, and it has the State League logo at the top. So Reproductive Freedom for All is a proposal to amend the state constitution to establish a new individual right to reproductive freedom, including the right to make all decisions about pregnancy and abortion. The amendment will allow the state to regulate abortion in some cases, but it will forbid prosecution of individuals when they're exercising this right according to its established terms. The ballot language also lists the new constitutional rights. They are the right to reproductive freedom, including the right to make and carry out decisions about pregnancy, such as prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion, miscarriage management, and infertility care. However, the amendment will allow the state to regulate abortion after fetal viability, but the state cannot prohibit an abortion if it's medically needed to protect a patient's life or physical or mental health. The amendment will also forbid the state from discriminating in the enforcement of these reproductive rights, and it will prohibit prosecution of anyone exercising the rights established by this amendment. And finally, the amendment will, it'll prohibit prosecution of anyone Yes, sorry. And then the amendment will invalidate state laws conflicting with it. So that's the language that will appear on the ballot for Proposal 3. So let's talk about why we need Proposal 3. First, important medical decisions should be guided by a patient's health and well-being, not by politicians' beliefs. And as you probably know, for a long time, some politicians across the country have been fighting to restrict reproductive health. And now, incredibly, after 50 years of reproductive freedom, the US Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade. And because of this, a Michigan law enacted over 90 years ago in 1931 could come into effect and make abortions illegal in Michigan. This 1931 law could also threaten doctors with prison for up to 15 years for providing an abortion. So Proposal 3 is going to ensure broad access to reproductive health care, and it will make sure no one goes to prison for providing medical care, safe medical care. So as I'm sure you know, when women can make decisions about their own reproductive health, including whether and when to have children, they have control of their life, their health, and their economic security. So if you want to know a little bit more about the effects on women and families of being denied an abortion, I highly recommend a book called The Turnaway Study by Diana Green Foster. It's a longitudinal study of 1,000 women done over 10 years and the effects of having an abortion or being denied an abortion. And it's very heart-wrenching. We'll put a link to the book and the research team in the chat. So why do we need this to be a constitutional amendment? Well, because we trust women in Michigan to make their own decisions about whether and when to be pregnant or become a parent. We believe these decisions are too important to be left up to the hands of politicians. And the only way that reproductive freedom can be protected from tinkering by politicians in Lansing is to make it a constitutional amendment. That way, it'll take a vote of the people of Michigan to overturn reproductive freedom once it's adopted. And if you need a reminder about why it's so important that Proposal 3 pass in Michigan, take a look at these numbers. I'm so happy to report that more than 753,000 of us in Michigan, in every county of Michigan, read, understood, and signed this petition to make sure reproductive freedom for all is on the ballot this November. These numbers show that voters across Michigan want to enshrine reproductive rights into the state constitution for women and their families. The League of Women Voters of Michigan supports Proposal 3 based on the League's established positions, including this one, which I'll just read to you, is quite short. Every U.S. resident should have access to affordable, quality health care, including birth control and the privacy to make reproductive choices. So let's spend a minute looking at the language of the constitutional amendment itself. It's only 300 words and it's printed on handout 2, so you can follow along. And why should we look at the amendment itself? Because knowing the exact language can help us be confident in answering questions about Proposal 3 and also combating disinformation. This slide shows the first part of the amendment language, and of course, it's going to mirror parts of the language on the ballot proposal. So Section 1 states every individual has a fundamental right to reproductive freedom. This right includes the right to make all decisions about matters related to pregnancy, childbirth, postpartum care, miscarriage management, infertility care. This fundamental right cannot be infringed on by the state unless there is a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. And we'll talk about what a compelling state interest is in a couple minutes. The amendment goes on to state that notwithstanding this reproductive right, the state may regulate abortions after fetal viability, unless in the professional judgment of the attending healthcare professional, an abortion is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual. We'll talk about fetal viability too in a minute. The amendment goes on to say that the state cannot discriminate in the protection and enforcement of this fundamental right. The state cannot prosecute or penalize a person based on pregnancy, miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. And the state cannot prosecute or penalize someone for aiding or assisting a pregnant person in exercising this right to reproductive freedom with their voluntary consent. And finally, Section 4 contains the definitions of compelling and fetal viability. So when is fetal viability? Under this amendment, that's the point in pregnancy when, in a professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional, and based on the particular facts of the case, there's significant likelihood that the fetus will have sustained survival outside of the uterus without the application of extraordinary measures. And when is the state's interest compelling? Only if it's for the purpose of protecting the health of the individual seeking care, consistent with accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on the individual's autonomous decision-making. So what's an example of a compelling state interest? Things like state licensings of abortion care facilities, this will not change with the amendment. State standards for safety and sanitation in clinics and other facilities providing abortion care, this will not change with the amendment. So now that we understand what the amendment actually says, we can use this knowledge to address or correct misinformation that's being put out there by people who oppose this amendment. For example, we know that reproductive freedom for all will allow abortions prior to fetal viability, and it will only allow abortions after fetal viability to protect the health of the mother, including the physical or mental health, as determined by a medical professional. So that's the definition we just looked at. Another important fact is reproductive freedom for all will nullify the 1931 prohibition on all abortions. It does not nullify any other existing Michigan laws, although courts may decide that some existing laws impermissibly infringe on reproductive freedom for all. We'll put a link in the chat to a Bridge, Michigan article discussing 2 of Michigan's existing laws dealing with abortion. One existing law requires a 24-hour waiting period for abortions, and another requires parental consent or a judicial waiver for a minor to get an abortion. The attorneys interviewed by Bridge thought that a 24-hour waiting period is unlikely to be considered an undue burden on the constitutional amendment, so waiting periods may still be required. And minors may not have the same rights to exercise reproductive rights as adults do. So parental consent or a judicial waiver may be required as well. But again, the courts will have to weigh in on these and have the final say. We'll also put a couple links in the chat to Bridge articles that just came out today that discuss what laws will and will not change, or likely will or will not change, and some fact checking done on the misinformation that's out there. So who's leading that campaign to pass Proposal 3? It's organized and supported by a huge coalition of Michigan advocates from Detroit to the Upper Peninsula and throughout the state. And here's a slide showing some of the supporters of reproductive freedom for all. And just to highlight a few, there's the League of Women Voters of Michigan, the ACLU of Michigan, and Planned Parenthood Advocates of Michigan. And a full list of supporters is on the website for Reproductive Freedom for All. And we'll put that link in the chat as well. And finally, here are a few facts about abortion in Michigan. In 2021, approximately 30,000 abortions were performed in Michigan. 89% of pregnancies ended by abortion were 12 weeks or less. In 2020, 18% of pregnancies in Michigan resulted in an abortion. 15% of all pregnancies in Michigan resulted in a miscarriage. And those under 18 accounted for 2% of all abortions. And in 2020, that was 724 abortions. And we'll put links in the chat to the citations you see at the bottom of this slide. And if you want more facts about abortion in Michigan, you can look at the in-depth report on Proposal 3 by the Nonpartisan Citizens Research Council of Michigan. And we'll put that link in the chat as well. So I want to thank you for listening. I and Kris and Lynn and Sue hope that this information helps you feel confident talking to your friends and family about these 3 proposals and voting yes on proposals 1, 2, and 3. And now I'm going to turn the program back to Kris to finish up.
So now we want to talk about where do we go from here? Talking about things you can do. Make copies of the handouts. Keep familiar with what's really said in the proposals so that when your friends and families are talking about it, you can tell them the importance of voting on these 3 proposals, and you can let them know why you are. The most important thing is for you to let them know why these proposals, whichever ones you support, are so important to you. And that can have a great deal of influence, maybe on helping motivating them to vote and to support, or at least even motivating your friends and family to learn more about these proposals and what they actually say and do. So again, reach out and talk to people that you know about these proposals. We're not asking, and it's not wise to try to go convert people that are staunchly, already made up their mind. And in fact, nobody, absolutely nobody, not one of us here likes to be told how to think or how to vote or how to make up our mind. But when you're talking to people about things that you care about, people that you know that might have some similar values and that might be more motivated to vote or might be more motivated to look into this or support these proposals because they hear some facts about it, you may be able to be a positive influence on helping them to support these good proposals. And also, in addition, besides supporting these ballot proposals, which we support because it shows responsibility in government. It helps to engage people more actively in elections and democracy. And it really supports women's rights to make decisions over their health and bodies. An important thing, even after the election is over, is to continue to stay active in democracy, in promoting voting rights and human rights and women's rights and all of those good things. So consider, if you're not already a member of the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County or of Michigan, invite your friends, invite your families to participate. Look at other wonderful organizations in Michigan that really work to support human rights and democracy, like the NAACP, the ALCU. Promote the vote. Voters, not politicians. Sometimes when things are getting hard in our society, it's so easy to feel powerless and alone. But when you join with other people who want to make a positive difference, it can really empower you and you can really be part of positive change. And I think one of the most important things, this is why I joined the League, and this is why I'm so excited to be part of this presentation. I was feeling so powerless and traumatized about assault to democracy that I felt I was experiencing. And I didn't know what to do. And I joined the League, and little by little, I got a little more involved. And they helped me, this League and our partners helped me to learn that I can make a difference. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to do, is to realize you can make a difference by your vote, by speaking your voice, by talking to your friends and family, by joining in with other people who are making a positive difference in the community. There are so many little things that you can do that are so powerful and result in protecting democracy, voting rights, women's rights, and so on. And I want to end with the quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg: real change, enduring change, I'm going to add powerful change, happens one step at a time.